Imagine walking into a room 6 months from now. You say almost nothing. You don't fight for attention. You don't prove yourself. And yet, everyone is studying you. They're waiting for your reaction, your approval, your move. How did you get there? Not by becoming more, by becoming less. Han Fei called it Wu Wei in strategy, the art of winning by withholding. Today, you're going to learn the strangest law of influence. The less you reveal, the more they assume. The less you react, the more they fear you. And the less you need from the room, the more the room needs you. Let's begin. I want you to think about something for a moment. Really think about it. When was the last time you walked into a room, maybe a party, maybe a meeting, maybe just a group of friends, and you felt completely at ease? Not performing, not trying, not wondering if you were saying the right things or standing the right way or laughing at the right moments. Just there, comfortable, powerful, even without trying to be. For most of us, that moment is rare. Maybe it's never happened. And that's not because you're broken or awkward or fundamentally flawed. It's because you've been taught the wrong game. You've been taught that influence is about addition. Add more charm, add more wit, add more presence. Be bigger, louder, more memorable. Perform until they notice you. And so you do. You prepare stories in your head before parties. You rehearse clever responses. You try so hard to be interesting that you forget to be interested. You exhaust yourself trying to control how people see you, and somehow, you end up feeling invisible anyway. I know this feeling intimately. I used to walk into rooms with a script running in my head. I'd think about what I was going to say before anyone even spoke to me. I'd analyze my body language. I'd try to seem confident, knowledgeable, worth knowing. And you know what happened? People looked right through me. Not because I wasn't smart or interesting or valuable, but because I was trying so damn hard. I was performing, and people can smell performance from across the room. It reeks of desperation, even when you're doing everything right on the surface. Then I discover Han Fei, a Chinese philosopher who lived over 2,000 years ago, during the Warring States period, a time when kingdoms rose and fell based on strategy, when one wrong move could cost you everything, when survival meant understanding power at its deepest level. And Han Fei was obsessed with power, not in a cruel way, but in a forensic way. He watched how it moved, how it shifted, how people gained it and lost it, often without understanding why. And what he discovered was so counterintuitive, so completely opposite to everything we're taught about influence and charisma and leadership, that when I first read his work, I thought it couldn't be true. But then I tried it. And everything changed. Han Fei's central insight was this: power is not about what you do. It's about what you don't do. It's not about presence. It's about absence. It's not about showing people who you are. It's about controlling what they think you are. And the less they actually know, the more powerful you become. Now, before you think this sounds manipulative or cold, stay with me. Because what Han Fei understood, and what I'm going to show you today, isn't about deceiving people or playing games. It's about understanding a fundamental truth of human psychology. We are all terrified of empty space. We rush to fill silence. We make assumptions to fill gaps in knowledge. We project on a mystery. And the person who understands this, who can create and hold that space without collapsing into explanation or performance, becomes the most magnetic person in any room. Let me tell you why you need this. Why this video matters. Why you're here. You're exhausted. You've been working so hard to be seen, to be heard, to be valued, and it's not working the way you thought it would. You show up fully. You give people your energy, your thoughts, your truth. And somehow, you still feel like you're on the outside looking in. You watch other people who seem to do less, say less, try less, and they command attention effortlessly. They walk in and the room shifts. Not because they're more attractive or more successful or more interesting than you, but because of something else, something you can't quite name. That something is what Han Fei spent his life studying. And here's what I'm going to give you today: the exact psychological laws that govern this kind of influence. Not the surface-level advice you've heard 1,000 times about confidence and eye contact and body language. I'm talking about the deep structure of power, the invisible architecture that holds every social interaction together. the laws that operate whether you're aware of them or not. By the end of this video, you're going to understand why your effort has been sabotaging you, why trying harder makes you less visible, not more, why mystery is infinitely more magnetic than clarity, and why the most forgettable thing you can do is try to be unforgettable. But more than that, you're going to learn how to stop performing for rooms and start designing them. You're going to understand that the power you've been chasing, that easy, effortless influence you see in others, was always available to you. You just didn't know you had to stop reaching for it. Most advice about influence gets it backwards. It tells you to be more charismatic, more articulate, more present. But Han Fei saw the opposite. He watched advisors in the king's court. He studied military strategists. He observed how power actually moved between people. And what he found was disturbing. The people who tried hardest to influence lost influence. The people who explained themselves lost credibility. The people who needed approval lost respect. And the people who withheld, who stayed silent when others rushed to speak, who remained still when others scrambled to react, who needed nothing when others needed everything. Those people accumulated power like gravity accumulates mass. This isn't about becoming cold or distant or playing hard to get. This is about understanding that in every interaction, there's an economy of energy. And most of us are bankrupting ourselves by spending too much. We over-explain. We overshare. We fill every silence. We react to every provocation. We prove ourselves to people who never asked for proof. And in doing so, we hand over our power piece by piece without realizing it. What I'm about to teach you will sound strange at first. It might even make you uncomfortable because it goes against everything you've been taught about connection and authenticity and showing up as your full self. But I promise you this, once you understand these laws, once you see them operating in every room you walk into, you'll never look at social dynamics the same way again. You'll see the invisible chess game. You'll understand why certain people have power and others don't. And most importantly, you'll know exactly how to stop giving yours away. So let's start with a story. Because Han Fei loved stories. He knew that the best way to teach profound truths was through parable, through observation, through seeing principle in practice. There's a story from Han Fei's own writings about two advisors in a king's court. Let's call them Wei and Zhang. Wei was brilliant, educated, articulate, passionate about his ideas. Every morning, he would arrive at court early, prepared with solutions to the kingdom's problems. He had strategies for agriculture, for military defense, for trade negotiations. And he spoke eloquently about all of them. He was the first to offer his opinion on every matter. He stayed late into the evening, making sure the king heard his counsel. He was dedicated, hard-working, indispensable, or so he thought. Zhang, on the other hand, was quiet. He arrived on time, but said little. When discussions erupted around the king's table, he listened. When others debated passionately, he observed. He almost never volunteered advice. And when he did speak, it was brief. Sometimes just a few words. Sometimes just a question that reframed the entire conversation. But mostly he was silent. Now, if you were watching this court from the outside, you'd assume Wei was the valuable one. He's clearly working harder. He's more engaged. He's contributing more. Wei certainly thought he was valuable. He could see how much effort he was putting in, how much he cared. But here's what actually happened. Over time, the king started to ignore Wei. His constant advice became background noise. His passionate speeches blurred together. The king knew exactly what Wei thought about everything, which meant Wei had no mystery, no scarcity, no power. Wei had made himself predictable, and predictable things lose value. Zhang, meanwhile, became the most influential person in that court. Why? Because every time he spoke, everyone stopped to listen. His words were rare, which made them precious. His opinions were unknown, which made them intriguing. The king found himself watching Zhang's face during meetings, trying to read his reaction, wondering what he was thinking. Zhang's silence created a void, and the king's mind rushed to fill it with importance. This is the first law of influence that Han Fei uncovered. Scarcity creates value, and availability destroys it. Think about your own life for a moment. Think about the people you know. There are probably people in your life who are always available, always eager to help, always ready with advice or companionship. And if you're honest, you probably take them a little bit for granted, don't you? It's not that you don't appreciate them. It's just that you know they'll always be there. Their presence is a given, and things that are given don't feel special. Then there are the people who are harder to reach. The friend who's busy with their own life, who you have to plan weeks in advance to see. The mentor who doesn't hand out their time freely. The person who doesn't text back immediately, who doesn't fill every silence, who doesn't need your validation. And if you're really honest, those people probably occupy more space in your mind, don't they? You wonder what they're thinking. You value their time more. You feel more important when they choose to give you their attention. This isn't a judgment on either type of person. This is just how human psychology works. We assign value based on scarcity. It's not fair, it's not moral, it's not even conscious most of the time. But it's true, and the people who understand this truth can use it. Now, I can already hear some of you thinking, but isn't this manipulative? Isn't this playing games? Isn't authenticity about showing up fully and giving people all of you? And here's what I want you to understand. There's a difference between authentic scarcity and manipulative withholding. Authentic scarcity means you have a life. You have boundaries. You have things you care about more than other people's approval. You don't need to fill every silence because you're comfortable with yourself. You don't need to explain yourself because you're secure in your choices. You don't need to prove your worth because you already know it. That's very different from playing hard to get or withholding affection or making people chase you. That's game playing. That's manipulation. And people can feel the difference, even if they can't articulate it. What Han Fei taught was this: your power comes from your center, from your calm, from the fact that you don't need anything from the room. And when you stop needing things from people, validation, approval, attention, recognition, you become infinitely more attractive to them. Let me give you another way to think about this. Imagine you're at a dinner party. There's one empty chair at the table. Someone was supposed to sit there, but never showed up. Nobody knows who it was or why they didn't come. What happens? People speculate. Was it someone important? Was it someone famous? Did something happen? Why didn't they come? Is it someone we offended? That empty chair becomes the most interesting thing at the party. Everyone's thinking about the person who isn't there more than the people who are. The absence becomes more powerful than any presence could have been. Now imagine a different scenario. Someone shows up to that party desperate to be noticed. They tell loud stories. They laugh loudly at their own jokes. They interrupt. They make sure everyone knows they're there. What happens? People are polite, but internally, they're exhausted by this person. They wish they'd take up less space. The person is trying so hard to be memorable that they become forgettable. Their presence is too much, which makes it worth nothing. This is the paradox Han Fei discovered. The more you try to fill the space, the less space you actually occupy. And the more comfortable you are with empty space, the more you fill the room without trying. So how do we actually apply this? How do we move from understanding this principle to living it? That's where the second law comes in. And this one might be even stranger than the first. Han Fei said, "Don't be the painting on the wall. Be the mirror." Most of us go through life trying to be interesting. We collect experiences, so we'll have stories to tell. We develop opinions, so we'll have something to say. We try to be colorful and vivid and memorable, a painting that catches the eye. And there's nothing wrong with being interesting. But here's what Han Fei noticed. Interesting people are still working for attention. They're still performing. They're still trying to be seen. Powerful people do something different. They make you feel seen. Think about the conversations you remember most fondly. The ones that left you feeling energized and alive and valued. I'm willing to bet those weren't conversations where someone impressed you with their knowledge or entertained you with their stories. They were conversations where you felt truly heard, where someone asked you questions that made you think, where they reflected back to you things you didn't even know you were saying, where you left feeling like you'd discovered something about yourself. That person probably doesn't remember that conversation as clearly as you do, because they weren't trying to be memorable. They were being present. They were being a mirror. When you make people feel seen, when you reflect them back to themselves, you become unforgettable. Not because of who you are, but because of who they get to be around you. And that's infinitely more powerful than trying to be impressive. This is what Zhang was doing in the king's court, by the way. He wasn't just being quiet. He was listening so deeply that when he did speak, his words reflected a complete understanding of the situation. He saw what others missed. And the king felt truly understood by Zhang in a way he never felt with Wei, who was too busy talking to actually hear. I tried this once at a work event. I was new at a company, and there was a networking dinner with about 20 people. Omi would have prepared. I would have thought of impressive things to say about my background, my ideas, my projects. I would have tried to establish myself as someone worth knowing. But instead, I decided to be the mirror. I spent the entire evening asking questions. Not surface questions like, what do you do? But real questions. What made you choose this field? What's the hardest part of your job that nobody talks about? If you could change one thing about how this company operates, what would it be? And something remarkable happened. I barely talked about myself all night. I just listened, really listened. And at the end of the evening, 3 different people told me I was the most interesting person they'd met. One person said they felt like they'd learned so much from our conversation. I hadn't taught them anything. I just given them space to think out loud. That's the power of being a mirror. People will credit you with wisdom you never claimed. They'll feel connected to you even though you barely shared anything about yourself. They'll want to be around you because being around you makes them feel more like themselves. Now here's the question I know you're asking. Doesn't this feel like you're hiding? Doesn't this mean people won't really know you? And the answer is no, because there's a difference between being closed off and being selectively open. Being a mirror doesn't mean you never share. It means you don't lead with sharing. It means you create space first. And when you do share, it lands with more weight because it's rarer. Think about the people you trust most in your life, the ones who really know you. Did you trust them because they told you everything about themselves right away? Or did you trust them because they listened first, created safety, proved they could hold space for you before they asked you to hold space for them? This is what Han Fei understood about power. It flows to the people who need it least. The person who doesn't need to talk earns the right to be heard. The person who doesn't need to be impressive becomes impressive. The person who doesn't need validation becomes valuable. And this brings us to the third law, which is perhaps the most practical and immediately applicable of everything Han Fei taught. It's what I call the reaction void. In every interaction, there are provocations. Someone says something that bothers you. Someone tests you. Someone tries to get a rise out of you. It might be subtle, a backhanded compliment, a dismissive tone, a challenge to your ideas. Or it might be obvious, direct criticism, confrontation, disrespect. And your instinct, the instinct that's been hardwired into you through evolution and socialization, is to react, to defend, to explain, to prove them wrong, to show them they can't treat you that way. But here's what Han Fei observed. The person who reacts is the person who loses power. Always. When you react, you're being controlled. Someone else has the remote control to your emotions, and they just pressed a button. You jumped. You proved you can be moved. And whether you realize it or not, you just handed them power. The person who doesn't react, who can sit with the provocation and choose their response instead of being chosen by their emotions, that person holds all the power. Not because they're cold or unfeeling, but because they're free. They're not being controlled by external stimuli. They're operating from their own center. I learned this the hard way. I used to be so reactive. Someone would criticize my work, and I'd immediately defend it. Someone would make a subtle dig, and I'd fire back. I thought I was standing up for myself. I thought I was being strong. But all I was doing was proving I could be manipulated. I was showing everyone exactly how to get to me. Then I read something Han Fei wrote about water. He said water is the most powerful force in nature because it doesn't resist. It doesn't fight. It flows around obstacles. It's soft, yielding, adaptable. But over time, it carved through stone. What if you could be like water? What if, when someone provoked you, you just let it flow past you? Not because you're weak, not because you don't care, but because you choose not to let them move you. I started practicing this. Small things first. Someone would say something that normally would have triggered a defensive response, and I would pause. Just 3 seconds. I'd breathe. I'd feel the impulse to react. and then I'd choose something different. Sometimes I'd respond calmly. Sometimes I'd change the subject. Sometimes I'd say nothing at all. And the weirdest thing happened. People started treating me with more respect. Not because I was being aggressive or dominant, but because I'd become unmovable. They couldn't get a reaction out of me, which meant they couldn't control me. And people respect what they can't control. There's a moment in every power dynamic where someone tests you. They push to see how you'll respond. It's usually not conscious, but they're looking for your edges, your buttons, your weak spots. And the moment you react predictably, you've shown them your weakness. You've given them the map to your vulnerabilities. But when you don't react, when you stay calm and present and unmoved, something shifts. They don't know how to read you anymore. You become opaque, mysterious, powerful. Now I want to be clear about something, because this can be misunderstood. Not reacting doesn't mean not feeling. It doesn't mean suppressing your emotions or pretending you're fine when you're not. That's just a different kind of trap. What I'm talking about is the space between feeling and acting. You can feel annoyed and not show it. You can feel hurt and not lash out. You can feel angry and not explode. You can feel all of your feelings fully, internally, and then choose how you respond externally. This is what Han Fei called the sovereign stance. The king on the throne doesn't flinch when someone brings bad news. Not because the news doesn't affect him, but because he's learned to feel without reacting, to process without performing. His power comes from his stillness. And you can develop this. It's a skill, not a personality trait. It's a practice, not a gift. Every time you pause before responding, you're building this muscle. Every time you choose your reaction instead of being chosen by it, you're reclaiming power. Let me tell you about a meeting I had once. I was presenting an idea to a group of executives, and one of them, let's call him Richard, absolutely hated it. He didn't just disagree. He was dismissive, almost contemptuous. This is exactly the kind of naive thinking that gets companies into trouble, he said. Have you even thought about the legal implications? The financial risk? This is amateur hour. Old me would have crumbled. Or I would have gotten defensive. I would have tried to prove him wrong, argue my case, show him all the research I'd done, and I would have lost the room. But I've been practicing the reaction void. So instead, I paused. I looked at Richard calmly. I let his words sit in the air for a moment. And then I said, very simply, that's an interesting perspective. Tell me more about the specific risks you're seeing. The room shifted. By not reacting defensively, by staying curious instead of combative, I'd done something Richard didn't expect. I'd refused to play the game he was trying to start. And suddenly, he had to actually explain his objections instead of just dismissing mine. The conversation became productive. Other people in the room started asking questions. And by the end, we'd actually refined the idea into something stronger. But here's the most important part. After that meeting, multiple people came up to me and said some version of I was really impressed by how you handled Richard. I didn't do anything impressive. I just didn't react. But because everyone else in that room would have gotten defensive or angry or flustered, my stillness stood out. My non-reaction was more powerful than any perfect response could have been. This is what Han Fei meant when he said the sage rules by doing nothing. He doesn't mean literally doing nothing. He means not being moved by every wind that blows, not reacting to every provocation, not being pulled in every direction by external forces. Think about the people you know who have real gravitas, real presence. They probably speak less than others. They probably don't rush to fill silence. And they probably don't get visibly ruffled easily. They have a quality of groundedness, of centeredness. And that quality makes people want to please them, impress them, earn their approval. Not because they're demanding it, but because they're so clearly not needing it. So let's talk about how to actually practice this. Because understanding these laws intellectually is very different from living them. And I want you to be able to walk away from this video with something concrete, something you can do today that will start shifting how people experience you. The first practice is what I call the 3-second delay. Starting right now, before you respond to anything, a question, a comment, a provocation, anything, pause for 3 seconds. It sounds simple, but it's one of the hardest things you'll ever do. Your brain is going to scream at you to respond immediately. You're going to feel awkward. You're going to worry people will think you're slow, or confused. But do it anyway. Count silently, 1, 2, 3, and then respond. This does several things. First, it breaks your reactive pattern. You're no longer on autopilot, saying the first thing that comes to mind. You're creating space between stimulus and response, which is where all freedom lives. Second, it signals to others that you're choosing your words, that you're thoughtful, that your response is deliberate, not reactive. And deliberate responses carry more weight than reactive ones. Third, it makes you more interesting. People will start watching you more carefully, wondering what you're thinking during that pause. You're creating a tiny mystery in every interaction. Try this for 1 week. Just 1 week. 3 seconds before every response. I promise you'll start noticing a shift in how people interact with you. The second practice, have your words. For the next week, say half of what you normally would. Cut your explanations in half. Stop oversharing. When someone asks you a question, answer it in 1 sentence instead of 3. When you're tempted to tell a long story, tell the short version. This is going to be uncomfortable. You're going to feel like you're being rude or withholding or not giving enough. But push through that discomfort, because what you'll discover is that your words start carrying more weight. When you speak less, people listen more. You're creating scarcity, and scarcity creates value. Plus, you're going to notice how much energy you were spending on unnecessary communication. All those extra words, all that over-explaining, all that filling of silence, it was exhausting you. When you stop doing it, you'll feel lighter, more present, more yourself. The third practice is what I call the observational shift. In your next 5 conversations, speak only 30% of the time. Spend 70% asking questions and reflecting what you hear. Become the mirror. This means you're going to have to get curious about other people. Really curious. Not fake curious where you're just waiting for your turn to talk, but genuinely interested in understanding them. Ask follow-up questions. Dig deeper. Reflect back what they're saying to check if you understood. So, it sounds like you're feeling frustrated not just because of the situation itself, but because it's happening again and you thought you'd moved past this. What I'm hearing is that the job itself is fine, but it's the culture that's draining you. When you say you want more freedom, what does that actually look like to you? These kinds of reflections and questions make people feel deeply seen. And when people feel seen by you, they become attached to you. Not in a codependent way, but in a way where they value your presence because your presence makes them feel more alive. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. You're thinking, but what about me? When do I get to share? When do I get to be known? And here's the beautiful paradox. You'll be known more deeply by sharing less. Because when you're not desperately trying to be seen, when you're not performing or proving or explaining yourself into existence, people will become curious about you. They'll start asking you questions. They'll want to know what you think. And when you do share, it will land with so much more impact because it's rare. Think about it this way. If someone talks about themselves constantly, you tune out. You know their whole life story, their opinions on everything, their problems and their triumphs. And because you know everything, none of it feels special. But if someone rarely shares, if they're mostly a listener and observer, and then one day they open up about something personal, you're riveted. You feel honored. You feel like you're being led into something sacred. The same information, but because of its scarcity, it has completely different value. This is what Han Fei understood about power and influence. It's not about the content of what you say or do. It's about the context. And you control the context by controlling your availability, your reactivity, and your revelation. I want to pause here and address something that might be coming up for you. This might all feel a bit calculating, a bit strategic, like I'm teaching you to be less authentic, or less vulnerable, or less human. But I want you to understand something crucial. This isn't about being less human. It's about being less desperate. There's a huge difference. When you're desperate for connection, for validation, for attention, you give yourself away indiscriminately. You overshare with people who haven't earned your trust. You react to people who haven't earned your response. You perform for people who haven't earned your performance. And that's not generosity. That's fear. Fear that if you don't do all of that, you won't matter. But when you understand these laws, when you practice them, you stop operating from fear. You stop needing every room to validate you. You stop needing every person to see you. You become selective. You choose who gets your energy, your words, your reactions, your depth. And you choose based on who's earned it, not who's demanding it. This is actually more authentic, not less, because you're no longer performing. You're no longer giving yourself away out of anxiety. You're being intentional. You're operating from your center instead of from your wounds. And people can feel the difference. They might not be able to articulate it, but they can feel when someone is needing something from them versus when someone is simply present. And they're drawn to the person who doesn't need them. It's a paradox, but it's true. Let me tell you one more story, and this one's personal. A few years ago, I was going through a difficult time. A relationship had ended, a project I'd poured myself into had failed, and I was questioning a lot of my choices. I felt lost, and in that lostness, I became needy. I reached out to friends constantly. I overshare my struggles. I looked for reassurance in every conversation. I needed people to tell me I was okay. And you know what happened? People started avoiding me. Not because they didn't care, but because I'd become exhausting. Every interaction with me was heavy. I was taking more than I was giving. I was asking people to fill a void in me that only I could fill. Then I read Han Fei, and I realized I'd lost my center. I was looking for my ground in other people, and when you do that, you become a burden. Not because you're bad or wrong, but because you're asking the impossible. So I stopped. I stopped reaching out constantly. I stopped oversharing. I stopped looking for validation. Instead, I turned inward. I sat with my discomfort. I processed my pain privately. I rebuilt my relationship with myself. And a strange thing happened. After a few weeks of this, friends started reaching out to me. Hey, I haven't heard from you in a while. Is everything okay? They were checking on me. Not because I'd asked them to, but because my absence created concern. Because I'd stopped being needy, I'd become worth pursuing. Why did see friends? I was different. I was lighter. I listened more. I didn't dump my problems on them. And they commented on it. You seem really good, they'd say. You seem centered. I wasn't good. I was still struggling. But I was struggling with dignity. I was handling my pain without making it everyone else's problem. And that made me someone people wanted to be around again. This is what Han Fei meant by the power of withdrawal. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is step back. Not disappear, but create space. Let people miss you. Let them wonder about you. Let them come to you instead of always going to them. This applies to romantic relationships too, by the way. The needier you are in a relationship, the less attractive you become. And I don't mean playing games or withholding love. I mean the difference between I love you and I want you in my life versus I love you and I need you to complete me. The first is attractive. The second is suffocating. When you have your own center, your own life, your own sources of meaning and fulfillment, you bring that fullness into relationships. You're not looking to extract. You're looking to share. And that's the difference between desperate energy and magnetic energy. Okay, let's bring all of this together because I've given you a lot and I want to make sure you can actually use it. Everything Han Fei taught comes back to one central principle. You are most powerful when you need nothing from the situation. When you walk into a room not trying to be seen or heard or validated or appreciated, but simply to be present, you become the most compelling person there. Not because you're performing, but because you're not. The techniques I've shared, the 3-second delay, having your words, the observational shift, these are all ways to practice not needing. They're training wheels for the kind of inner sovereignty that makes people naturally gravitate toward you. But underneath all of these techniques is something deeper. It's a shift in how you see yourself. Because if you're still defining your worth by external validation, if you're still measuring your value by how people respond to you, then no technique is going to work. You'll just be performing again in a different way. The real transformation happens when you realize you don't need the room's approval. You don't need to be the most interesting person at the party. You don't need to win every argument. You don't need to prove your worth, because you already know your worth. It's not up for debate. And when you know that, really know it in your bones, your entire energy shifts. You stop grasping. You stop performing. You stop exhausting yourself. You just show up, fully present, fully yourself, needing nothing. And ironically, that's when you get everything you were looking for. This is what I mean by dominating a room. I don't mean dominating in an aggressive or controlling way. I mean you set the tone. You create the space. People feel your presence not because you're demanding it, but because you're so clearly comfortable with yourself that it gives them permission to be comfortable too. Think about the people who have this quality. They're not necessarily the most talkative or the most charismatic in an obvious way, but they have a groundedness, a stillness. You feel calmer around them. You feel more yourself. And you find yourself caring what they think, even though they've never asked you to. That can be you. That is you, actually, when you stop trying so hard to be something else. I want you to imagine something with me. Imagine it's 6 months from now. You've been practicing these principles. You've been doing the 3-second delay before responding. You've been having your words, being more selective with your energy. You've been practicing being the mirror, reflecting people back to themselves instead of trying to impress them. You walk into a room. Maybe it's a party, maybe it's a meeting, maybe it's just coffee with a friend. And you notice something different. You're not anxious. You're not rehearsing what you'll say. You're not wondering how you're coming across. You're just there, present, grounded, calm. The conversation flows. You ask genuine questions. You listen without an agenda. You speak when you have something to say, and you're silent when you don't. And you notice people leaning in when you talk. You notice them watching you when you're quiet. You notice them seeking your approval instead of you seeking theirs. Someone says something provocative, something that would have triggered you before, and you feel the old impulse rise, the urge to defend, to explain, to react. But instead, you pause. 3 seconds. You breathe, and you respond from your center, not from your wound. The person who tried to provoke you looks confused. You didn't take the bait. You didn't give them the reaction they wanted. And in that moment, the power dynamic shifts. They're the one off balance now, not you. Later, someone asks your opinion on something. And instead of launching into a long explanation, desperate to show how much you know, you give a simple answer. 2 sentences, clear and honest. And then you're quiet. You don't fill the silence. You don't elaborate unless asked. And you watch as your words land with weight. People are nodding. They're thinking about what you said. Your brevity made your words matter. By the end of the evening, you haven't dominated the conversation. You haven't been the loudest or the funniest or the most obviously charismatic. But multiple people want to talk to you more. They're asking for your contact information. They're suggesting you meet up again. They're telling you how much they enjoyed talking with you. And the most remarkable part? You didn't do anything special. You just stopped doing all the things that were making you invisible. You stopped performing. You stopped trying. You stopped needing validation. And in that space, your natural magnetism emerged. This is what's possible. This is what's available to you. Not 6 months from now, but right now. Because these laws aren't about becoming someone different. They're about remembering who you actually are when you're not busy trying to be someone else. You know what the real tragedy is? Most people go their whole lives not knowing this. They exhaust themselves trying to be seen, never realizing they're working against their own power. They think if they just try harder, explain better, show up bigger, eventually people will appreciate them. But it doesn't work that way. It's never worked that way. The people who have real influence, real power, real magnetism, they're not working harder. They're working differently. They understand the laws Han Fei taught. They know that less is more. They know that silence is powerful. They know that needing nothing is the key to having everything. And now you know it too. But here's the thing. Knowing isn't enough. You have to practice. You have to actually do this. Because your old patterns are strong. They're habits formed over decades. Your impulse to over-explain, to fill silence, to prove yourself, to react. These impulses are deeply wired. They're not going to disappear just because you understand they're counterproductive. So you have to be patient with yourself. You're going to forget. You're going to catch yourself mid-sentence, realizing you're over-explaining again. You're going to react to a provocation and immediately wish you hadn't. You're going to fill a silence that you should have let breathe. That's okay. That's part of the process. Every time you catch yourself, you're building awareness. And awareness is the first step to change. Don't beat yourself up. Just notice. And next time, try again. Start small. Don't try to completely transform how you interact with people overnight. Just pick one practice. Maybe it's the 3-second pause. Maybe it's asking more questions and sharing less. Maybe it's not reacting to the next thing that would normally trigger you. Pick one. Practice it for a week. Notice what changes. Notice how people respond differently. Notice how you feel different. Then add another practice. Layer them slowly. Because this isn't about performing a new character. It's about gradually releasing the performance you've been doing your whole life and letting your natural power emerge. I promise you, if you do this, if you actually practice these principles instead of just intellectually understanding them, your life will change. Not in some magical overnight way, but in a deep, structural way. Your relationships will shift. Your career will shift. Your sense of self will shift. Because when you stop giving your power away, when you stop exhausting yourself trying to be seen, you finally have the energy to actually build the life you want. You're not scattered anymore. You're not constantly anxious about how you're being perceived. You're centered. You're grounded. You're free. And from that place of freedom, everything becomes possible. Let me tell you what I see when I look at the world through Han Fei's eyes. I see rooms full of people unconsciously playing out these power dynamics. I see people giving away their influence word by word, reaction by reaction. I see the few people who understand these laws quietly accumulating power while everyone else wonders what makes them so special. And I see you. I see your potential. I see how much power you have that you're not using because you're too busy trying to prove you have it. I see how magnetic you could be if you just stopped trying so hard. I see the version of you that walks into rooms and changes the energy without saying a word. That version of you isn't some future possibility. It's who you actually are underneath all the performance, all the anxiety, all the trying. It's your natural state. And every time you practice these principles, you're not becoming that person. You're removing the obstacles that have been hiding them. Han Fei lived in a brutal time. A time when understanding power wasn't an abstract philosophical exercise. It was survival. The wrong move could cost you your life. The right understanding could save your kingdom. And what he figured out in those circumstances wasn't just political strategy. It was human psychology at its deepest level. He figured out that power isn't something you take or demand or perform. It's something that flows naturally to the people who don't need it. It's something that accumulates in stillness, not in action. It's something that grows in silence, not in speech. And 2,000 years later, in a completely different world, these laws still hold true. Because human psychology hasn't changed. We still respond to scarcity. We still project on a mystery. We still respect what we can't control. We still gravitate toward people who are comfortable with themselves. The specifics of life might be different. Han Fei was advising kings. You're navigating modern relationships and careers and social dynamics. But the underlying principles are exactly the same, and they work just as powerfully now as they did then. So here's what I want you to take away from this. Here's the core truth underneath everything I've shared. You're not broken. You're not failing because you're not enough, not charismatic enough, not interesting enough, not confident enough. You're exhausting yourself because you're trying to be everything to everyone. You're giving yourself away to people and situations that haven't earned you. You're performing instead of being. You're reacting instead of choosing. And the moment you stop, the moment you reclaim your energy, your words, your reactions, your presence, everything changes. Not because you've become someone different, but because you've finally stopped pretending to be someone you're not. The power you've been looking for outside yourself, in other people's approval, in validation, in recognition, it was always inside you. You just couldn't access it while you were so busy giving it away. So stop giving it away. Stop over-explaining yourself to people who aren't really listening. Stop filling every silence because you're uncomfortable with empty space. Stop reacting to every provocation because you think you have to defend yourself. Stop performing in every interaction because you're afraid of not being enough. Just stop. And in that stopping, in that stillness, you'll find what you've been searching for all along. Not power over others. Not domination in the aggressive sense. But sovereignty, autonomy, freedom, the ability to walk into any room and be completely yourself, needing nothing, offering everything, and being valued precisely because you're not trying to be valued. This is what Han Fei understood. This is what he taught. And this is what I'm passing on to you now. You are the empty chair at the dinner party. You are the advisor whose words are rare and therefore precious. You are the mirror that makes others feel seen. You are the still water that shapes stone. You always were. You just forgot while you were busy trying to be something else. Now you remember. So let me ask you something, and I want you to really sit with this question. What would your life look like if you stopped trying to prove your worth and simply lived from it? What if you walked into your next social interaction not trying to be impressive, but just being present? What if you had your next difficult conversation not defending or explaining, but just listening and responding from your center? What if you spend your next week not filling every silence, but letting space breathe? What if you gave yourself permission to take up less space verbally and physically, trusting that your presence is enough? What if you stopped reacting to every little thing that bothers you and started choosing your responses? What if you became comfortable with people not fully understanding you, not fully knowing you, and you stopped exhausting yourself trying to make them see you? What would change? I'll tell you what would change. Everything. Your anxiety would decrease because you're not constantly monitoring how you're being perceived. Your energy would increase because you're not depleting yourself in every interaction. Your relationships would deepen because people would finally feel like they can be real around you. Your influence would grow because you'd stop pushing and start pulling. And most importantly, you'd finally feel like yourself, not the performed version of yourself that you've been exhausting yourself maintaining, but your actual self, grounded, centered, sovereign. This is what dominance really means, by the way. Not control over others, but complete ownership of yourself, your reactions, your energy, your presence, your worth. When you own yourself fully, when you're not fragmenting your energy across a dozen different performances and anxieties and needs for validation, you become whole. And wholeness is magnetic. People are drawn to it because it's so rare. Because most people are scattered, desperate, performing. And you're not. You're just there, fully, completely, unapologetically. That's the subtle way to dominate any room. Not through force, but through presence. Not through performance, but through authenticity. Not through needing, but through not needing. And it's available to you right now. Not after you read 10 more books, or take a course, or fundamentally change your personality. Right now. In your next conversation, in your next interaction, in your next moment of choice between reacting and responding, between performing and being, between needing and not needing. Choose differently, just once, and then do it again, and slowly, inevitably, you'll become the person you've always had the potential to be. The person who walks into rooms and changes them without trying. The person others are drawn to without understanding why. The person who has power because they've finally stopped reaching for it. Now, if this resonated with you, if somewhere in this video you felt that click of recognition, that moment of, oh, that's what I've been doing wrong, I want you to do something for me. Leave a comment telling me which law hit you hardest. Was it scarcity? Was it being the mirror? Was it the reaction void? Tell me which one you're going to practice first. I read every comment, and I'm genuinely curious where you are in your journey with this. Because everyone's relationship with power and influence is different. We all have different wounds we're operating from, different patterns we're trying to break. And if you want more of this, the kind of wisdom that doesn't just inform you, but transforms you, the kind of philosophy that actually changes how you move through the world, then subscribe. Hit that button, because this channel is for people who think differently, for people who feel deeply, for people who are done with surface-level advice and ready for the truth, even when it's uncomfortable. I make these videos because I believe you deserve to know how the game actually works. Not the game people pretend we're playing, where everyone's just being authentic and whoever's most genuine wins. But the real game, the psychological game, the game of perception and power and influence that's happening in every interaction, whether you're aware of it or not. And once you see that game, once you understand its rules, you can't unsee it. You'll watch it play out everywhere. And you'll have a choice. Keep playing it unconsciously, giving your power away, or play it consciously from your center on your terms. I can't make that choice for you. but I can show you it exists. I can give you the tools. I can teach you what Han Fei taught, what I've learned, what actually works in the real world. The rest is up to you. But I'll be here, making these videos, sharing this wisdom, building a community of people who refuse to settle for the shallow explanations and easy answers. People who want the truth, even when it requires them to change. If that's you, then welcome. I'm glad you're here, and I can't wait to see who you become when you finally stop trying to be anyone other than yourself. I'll see you in the next one.